Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to another Bible Chat episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for watching. If you don't know me, my name is Tadiwa. I create faith-based content. So I just share my uni life. I share vlogs. I also share my walk with Jesus to hopefully encourage somebody in their own faith journey. I have been going through the Old Testament for a while now, and the reason I did this was because I was neglecting the Old Testament. I've just always found it a lot more comforting to read the New Testament, just because I think we see a lot more of God's grace in the New Testament. It's a lot lighter, it's a lot more reassuring to read. And a lot of the times when new Christians are told to read the Bible, they're often told to start with the New Testament, right? And I think that is completely valid. It is important to know who you're saying yes to. And in the New Testament, we learn a lot about Jesus's life. We learn about his love for us and what he did for us on the cross. But it is equally important for us to read the Old Testament as well, because we learn a lot about God's character and just how he relates to people. For example, the Israelites, we learn a lot about their back and forth with God, their struggle with obedience, the mistakes that they made as well. And we can learn a lot from the mistakes that they made, and we can try to avoid those mistakes. And as I was preparing for this episode, I actually went through 1 Corinthians chapter 10, and it talks about warnings from Israel's past, warnings from Israel's history. And 1 Corinthians chapter 10 verse 11 actually says, "These things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our instruction." And verse 6 says, "Now these things took place as examples for us, so that we would not desire evil things as they did." So it is so important to go through the Old Testament, because you know what? There's nothing new under the sun. History repeats itself, and so we need to be aware of the things that could possibly tempt us, right? I've just been going through the book of Numbers, and recently I went through chapters 23, 24, 25, and I had that, I need to share moment. I need to tell somebody about this. So I'm going to go through this. And if you have time, maybe pause the video and go through those chapters. But I'm just briefly going to explain the story and the context of everything. So in these chapters, we learn about Balaam and Balak. So Balaam was a prophet in the book of Numbers, and he was basically asked by the king of Moab, who was Balak at the time, to come and curse the Israelites. So what had happened was the Israelites were making their way to the promised land, and they were going to pass through the land of Moab. And in the other lands that they had passed, they had brutally defeated the people, the Amorites and so forth. So now the Moabites were kind of like, oh my gosh, the Israelites are coming. What are we going to do? So they sent for this prophet, Balaam, who had spiritual gifts and had a relationship with God, to come and curse the Israelites, so it would be easier for them to defeat the Israelites or to drive them away per se, right? And so Balaam makes his way to King Balak, right? And so in order for these curses to work, they actually make sacrifices. So there's 7 altars that are put in place, 7 rams and 7 bulls that are actually sacrificed in preparation for these curses, right? But fortunately for the Israelites, God puts words in Balaam's mouth, and these words only speak blessings over Israel. So there's 4 times that Balaam is basically given an opportunity to curse the Israelites. 4 times where he's taken to different positions, and I mean physically. The king literally takes him to like a rocky top, like a rocky hill, where you can see the Israelites properly, and they keep changing these positions each time. And the king keeps getting frustrated because he's like, I've told you to curse them, but you keep blessing them, right? But Balaam has no choice. He literally says, I can only speak what God tells me to speak. And he continues to speak blessings over them, almost like, Balak, the king, has given an opportunity for the Israelites to be blessed, right? When you go through these chapters, you actually see the kinds of blessings that are being spoken over them. And Balaam literally says things like, I cannot curse people that God hasn't cursed. I cannot denounce people that God hasn't denounced, right? And these chapters are so important, because there are so many promises that God has spoken over us. There's a word that God has spoken over your life that no one can go against. God had made a covenant with the Israelites, and it was not going to be broken, right? And we actually see that the Israelites were unaware that this was happening. They were in their tents. They were just going about their daily lives, eating, drinking. But this was happening around them. There was so much going on around them. Just imagine these two people, they were literally standing, going around in strategic positions so that they could curse the Israelites. But God would only bless them, right? God would not allow Balaam to curse the Israelites because they were blessed, because they were a chosen people. And it's the same for us as well. God has so much love for us that He will only protect us, that He will only speak blessings over us. There's so many blessings that have been spoken over our lives, and there's so much that is happening in the spiritual world. There's so much that is happening in the spiritual realm, and God is always fighting for us. There's spiritual attacks that are targeted at us, but God is always fighting for us. As I was reading through these chapters, just reading through the blessings that were being spoken over Israel, I was like, wow, like this is just so amazing. The amount of love that God has for His people, the amount of love that God has for us despite our sin. How many times had the Israelites sinned? How many times had the Israelites gone to worship idols and they say sorry to God and they go back to worshiping idols again? That constant back and forth. But God still loves them. God still kept His covenant with them, right? And I just want to read a few of these blessings that were being spoken over them, because these are things that even we can relate to as well, right? So the first one I already said, how can I curse someone God has not cursed? So in my Bible, which is the Sherry Street Bible, they actually label it as Balaam's oracle. So it's the first, second, third, and fourth oracle, right? Because there were 4 times that this happened. He says things like, there's no magic curse against Jacob, right? And no divination against Israel. And, it says the Lord their God is with them. This is from the second oracle. It says, how beautiful are your tents, Jacob, your dwellings, Israel. They stretch out like river valleys, like gardens beside a stream, like aloes the Lord has planted, like cedars beside the water. And in the fourth oracle, he actually starts to prophesy the things that would happen to Israel, how a star will come from Jacob and a scepter will rise from Israel, right? And this can be pointing to the kings like King David or even the Messiah as well. And I just think, wow, this is so beautiful. Just imagine there's so many rooms that we may walk into sometimes, or many spaces where people don't want us, or where people are wishing bad on us or wishing evil upon us. But God is constantly fighting for us. Just imagine, like, Balak, this king, had evil intentions. He wanted to curse the Israelites, but in fact, he gave the Israelites an opportunity to actually receive blessing. This is just so amazing to see God's love in action. And again, this is where we can say we learn about God's character, God's unwavering nature, how despite their sin, how despite our sin, God still loves us, God still works for us, God still fights for us, and He still fights for us even when we don't see. And as we read through these chapters, right, like I already mentioned earlier, the king keeps taking Balaam to strategic positions where he can speak a curse over these people, right? So he keeps taking him to higher ground where he can have a good view of the Israelites so that he can curse them, right? The enemy himself, he puts himself in places where he can tempt us, where he positions himself in areas in our lives where he can curse us or where he can fight against us. But we already know that we have victory because of God. We already know that the battle has been won. And I think this can also just speak to spiritual alertness. There may be some areas in our lives that we are leaving open to spiritual attack. Are we aware? Are we constantly praying over our lives? Are we praying over the different areas in our lives? Are you praying over your finances, over your family, over your friends? When you go to work, when you wake up in the morning, are you surrounding yourself with circles of prayer? And I think that's just so important. This passage also speaks to the importance of prayer in our lives, how we need to pray without ceasing. Ephesians chapter 6 verse 18 says, pray in the Spirit at all times and on every occasion. Stay alert and be persistent in your prayers, right? And you know what's even funny? Like towards the end, in the last oracle, the last blessing that Balaam speaks over Israel, he actually speaks a curse over Moab itself, the land of Moab, the king of Moab. In chapter 24, verse 17, it literally says he will smash the forehead of Moab and strike down all the Shittites. And this is just so amazing, What's the king of Moab meant for evil, God meant for good. He used it to his advantage. And this is something that will also happen in our lives. There will be situations where we will think this situation is against me, or I don't think I have favor in this situation. But because we have God, we already have victory. And I think it is so important to meditate on that, and so important to remember that, and just seeing the way that God works. Like, if I was the king of Moab, I would have turned and I would have joined the Israelites. Anyways, moving on, something that just made me grieve when I was reading is what happens straight after these chapters. So straight after the last oracle, the last blessing has been spoken over Israel, the next chapter, chapter 25, the Israelites are said to have been prostituting and worshipping idols. And this just made me so sad. I was like, just imagine how God felt seeing his people whom he had just protected, whom he had just spoken so many blessings over, continuing to sin, continuing to worship idols and not him. And I think, again, we can relate to this. There's so many times where we, just continuously sin despite what God has done for us. Why can't we devote our lives to him? Why can't we make God the center of our lives after everything that he has done for us? And I think this is just so like us. This is so like human nature, to completely or quickly forget what God has done for us. So it is so important to remember the things that God has done for you. And this, I actually just got so emotional reading this, because when you go through the blessings that were being spoken over Israel, the kind of language that is used, it's just so amazing. You can see God's love through it all, and then to see what happens straight after completely wrecked me. It just forced me to reflect on my life as well. Where are the areas in my lives where I have seen God's goodness and then gone on to sin, or seen God's goodness and then gone on to do something completely different, or gone completely out of his presence. And this is just a call again to just remember to prioritize your relationship with God. Don't get carried away by the things of the world, by studying, working, friendships, money. These things are all so important. Obviously, we're called to work and make sure everything we're doing for God. Work hard, have integrity in whatever area you are in your life, whatever profession you are doing, but always make sure that God is the center of your life. Don't get carried away by those things and forget your relationship with God, because at the end of the day, those things are not eternal. What is eternal and what will sustain you is your relationship with God. These things are so important. It's so important to really invest in your relationship with God, to make time for him. And like I said in my earlier video, because he truly does change you. Remember what God has done. Remember what we need to do as children of God as well. There is an urgency to literally share his word. There is an urgency to share the gospel. We cannot be lukewarm in these times. And something else I've been noticing as I've been reading the Old Testament is just how people were so intentional about remembering what God had done for them, right? For example, Jacob named a place Bethel because God had met him there, and Bethel translates to house of God. And there's another passage where he even names a place Peniel because he had seen God face to face. It means face of God. After struggling with God, he had met God face to face. He had seen the mercy of God, and he names this place because of his encounter with God. And we see the same with Abraham, with Samuel, the name Ebenezer, all the names of God that we know. They're names that originated from people's encounters with God. There's so many different ways in the Old Testament that people have intentionally chosen to remember God. And so if you have like a diary, notepad, or a prayer board even, it is so important to keep track of those things. Keep track of the big and small things that God has done for you, the answered prayers, the blessings. If something happens today, even something small where you feel like, I think God spoke to me, I think that was God. Me finding parking today, I'm big on parking. Me finding parking today, I think that was God. Write those things down, because you know what, there are going to be times where you feel discouraged. There are going to be situations where you feel like things are not in your favor, and you can go back to those things that you've written down and just remember God's faithfulness. And instead of complaining or being discouraged because of your situation, you actually shift to being being a lot more grateful. You start to become more grateful because of whatever situation you're in, and you start to thank God for what He has done, and also thank Him for what He's going to do. Just to close this off, this again, just a reminder to just make God the priority, make God the center of your life, and just continue to spend time with Him. Have that relationship with Him, because He just gives you so much joy and so much peace. And just remember that God is always fighting for you. God is for you. God is for us. He's not against us. And even the enemies that we have, the enemy that we have, God is fighting our enemies for us. God literally cursed Israel's enemy, literally cursed the king of Moab when when the king of Moab wanted to curse them, right? He literally used that to his advantage. And that just speaks to the way that God works. Like, He's just so amazing. And I think it's just so important to remember that, but also to just remain persistent in prayer, to have a strong prayer life, to remain alert. And every time you just see something happening in your life, make sure you pray, because I believe that everything is spiritual. Pray about everything, right? And again, this is also just a reminder to read the Old Testament. It's not easy to go through it. Sometimes, there will be stories that you may not understand, and I've always felt that way. There's certain stories where I don't immediately get like a revelation. I don't immediately understand, even when I spend minutes analyzing it. But you see that there's times where you literally read a passage, right? And then the following day, as you're going about your day, you start to kind of remember what you've read. And that's just how God works. So you reading something every day plants that seed, and then God does the rest of the work. If He wants to open your spiritual eyes for you to be able to understand what's going on, He will do that. And it may not always happen immediately, but it's so important to be disciplined in that, to make that a habit. Not only the Old Testament, just to read the Bible in general. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and I hope that you learned something new. Every time I read the Old Testament, I actually realize there's so many stories that I didn't know about. Like the chapter before this literally talks about a talking donkey, and I had no idea that there was a talking donkey in the Bible. So going through the Old Testament has honestly been such a blessing. I've been learning so many new things about God and everything that He has done, and just the different ways that He works, and it's just so amazing to see. So I encourage you to read your word, to go through the Bible, go through the Old Testament as well, and not just the New Testament. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. I hope that you were blessed. Stay well, stay blessed, stay healthy, and I will see you in the next one.